You're listening to episode 22 of the On Being Human podcast.
Welcome to the On Being Human podcast, where we believe transforming ourselves can positively transform society. Your host, Brandy Fleck, has the honor of exploring the human condition with real people who bravely share their personal stories of adversity, healing, joy, and more. If you're seeking empowerment, strength, and inspiration, listen in to engage and explore tough topics that help us humanize one another, understand ourselves better, spread love, and connect.
Welcome back to another soul-exposing exploration of what it means to be human. This week's guest is Fran Cooper Van Allen, a hospice nurse for about 20 years. She's now semi-retired and is a caregiver for the elderly. She's a wife, a mother, and an administrator for an Al-Anon and Nar-Anon support group. Fran lives on a hobby farm in Georgia, is an avid gardener, and she's interested in beekeeping and yoga. She reads, writes, and crafts. She loves life and giving back to society. Fran is such a kind and joyful person. Today, she's going to teach us about what hospice is, why it's important, and how spiritual and important end of life can be. She describes how she helps families deal with the impending death of a loved one and how she helps patients cope with pain and the thought of dying. It might seem like a tough topic on the surface, but I want you to tune in today for takeaways about making choices for yourself in living wills, to take that burden off of family, and to hear a beautiful message of love and spirituality. Plus, Fran tells us stories of what it's like to be with someone when they pass, examples sure to provide hope that our energy doesn't end here on this planet when our bodies do. On a personal note, a couple days ago, before this episode's original air date, I learned that a dear great aunt of mine has entered hospice. I'm sending much love and prayer to my extended family right now, and this episode is very special to me. And I think hospice is a very special gift, so I'm excited for you guys to get to learn about it and the importance of it. In other news, this week's episode wraps up a spring series of episodes focusing on the theme that death brings new life, meaning one door closing is another opening. Spring is upon us, and opportunities for new beginnings abound. If you're interested in other episodes with these similar themes, start back at onbeinghuman.podcast.com/episodes/019 for a solo episode from me on that topic. Episode 20 features Fran, our guest today, telling us about the parallels of grief when coping with addiction or death, and how to let go of a life of chaos for love, joy, and peace. And last week on episode 21, we had an amazing Nashville astrologer and psychic medium, Susie Kerr-Wright, who described what it was like to feel and work with energy and the stars. You don't want to miss any of these hope-filled discussions. Again, that's episode 19, 20, 21, and today's is episode 22. All at onbeinghumanpodcast.com/episodes. Next week, we'll be transitioning to topics of social connection through travel and various forms of art, including food, with Stephanie Stewart Howard, a brilliant Nashville author and friend. One more thing before we dive in. I want to thank you so much for listening. This new podcast is growing because you guys are listening, and it's really exciting. So I want to ask you two questions. One, are you loving what you're hearing at your favorite podcast, On Being Human? And two, are you going to shop at Amazon this week? To support our efforts, you can now go to onbeinghumanpodcast.com/shop. That's onbeinghumanpodcast.com/shop. That's SHOP. And click the Amazon banner there to do your regular shopping at no additional charge to you. A portion of all of your purchases made through that click will go directly to the production of this podcast. How easy is that? Same Amazon, same experience, same shopping you'd do anyways. Best of all, same prices, but you're supporting the On Being Human podcast. I plan to keep the podcast as a free subscription to valuable content for as long as I'm running it. So that little click from onbeinghumanpodcast.com/shop before you start shopping on Amazon is the only difference to help make that happen. Give it a whirl and let me know what you think. As always, subscribe on iTunes and Apple Podcasts, leave a rating, leave a review, and you can find the show on Facebook and Pinterest for now. Without further ado, let's hear from the beautiful and amazing Fran Cooper Van Allen. Hi, Fran. Welcome to the show again. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm so excited to have you back. We just had so much ground to cover. We had to do a second episode because we really want to dive into hospice today. So if you don't mind, we'll just dive in and I'll start asking you questions. So what makes you happy and how do you approach life?
I think the first thing that makes me happiest is my family. I'm married to my friend of 30 years, and we have a wonderful marriage. And I have 3 beautiful kids and 2 grandkids and 1 on the way. So I'm really excited about that, watching them grow and make memories with them. So my family is the most important thing to me. And then my friends give me so much joy and acceptance and fun. Nature's super important to me. So getting my hands dirty is a real necessity for me. It's therapy. When I'm really stressed, digging in the dirt helps me.
Oh, yeah.
Also, my animals give me so much peace and joy. We have a farm, and we have alpacas, chickens, dogs, and a cat, and we just added 7 baby chicks today. So
awesome.
that makes me super happy. Also, music, song, and dance, they're a huge part of my life. My husband's a musician, and I met him through music. I approach life, I try to keep a grateful heart and be happy and joyous for all the blessings that I have, because I have a great life and I have so much to be thankful for. So I try to keep that always in the forefront of my mind and be really grateful. And I think that with a happy heart and a good attitude, you can pretty much do anything you put your mind to.
Awesome. Well, that's all really cool. And I will just say for our listeners that if they didn't hear the first episode you did, that'll be at onbeinghumanpodcast.com/episodes/020. So they can go check that out. But if they haven't listened to that yet, can you please tell us what you do for a living and how your career has evolved?
I sure will. I'm a semi-retired hospice nurse. And I started out in nursing in 1996, went to school for 3 years while I was raising 3 kids and being married. And I worked in home hospice right out of school. We had moved to Houston, Texas, and the only people that would hire me was hospice. And I was kind of leery about that. But when I started hospice, I just fell in love with it. Very special calling. So I worked in hospice all over Georgia, Texas, California for about 18 years, and I developed a blood clot in my leg. I had to come off the road, and I went to a hospice house. And for those that don't know, it's called an inpatient unit. It's where the very, very ill go to be treated, or people can go for what's called respite, and we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
But then, my back blew out, so I ended up now I'm just doing private duty sitting. I have some elderly ladies that I take care of, and each one gets me 2 days a week. And my spare time, working on a training for hospice caregivers and for families and friends of those with dementia. And we also have the hobby farm, like I said. So that's another little sideline. We
Gotcha.
have a little petting zoo going on. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you said you're working on a training. Is this an online course people would access, or do you go around and teach at or centers or things like that?
It's still in the works, but my goal would be to do both.
Okay, awesome.
I find that a lot of hospice caregivers, people think that they can just jump into hospice and do it, and it's a completely different calling and set of circumstances and ethics, all kind of things that are wrapped up in it, and it's way more complex than people anticipate. So I would love to kind of help hospice caregivers to be more empathetic and more understanding, and also give them support because it's a really tough calling.
Gotcha. Well, I can't wait to learn more about it. But before we get into those details, since you are a caretaker now for the elderly, Can you tell us first, what are your thoughts on aging and how our society handles it?
How much time do you have?
Let's see.
Yeah, I feel that we are in denial of aging as a culture, and mostly the American culture. We shove our elderly into nursing homes, assisted livings, personal care homes, because of our society and because of our work habits here. People are sandwiched between having kids and taking care of their jobs, and then they have elderly parents that they have to take care of, and so the elderly kind of gets shoved away. I think a lot of it is because we like to defy age.
Mm-hmm.
The TV is just covered with, all these creams that are going to make you look younger, and all these ways to look better, and so much time and money and energy is spent on trying to look young or younger and hiding from age. I have a cute story. My 8-year-old granddaughter and I were sitting and watching TV, and a commercial came on for a cream called Crepe Erase. And it gets rid of the wrinkles under your arms and the flabby skin. And she looked at me and she touched me on the face and she said, "Mima, you need Crepe Erase."
Oh, no.
But an 8-year-old thinks that my wrinkles need to be gone. And to me, there's something wrong with that. So, we rush in for our elderly. We don't know how to communicate with them. We listen to them briefly and then we rush back out. They're just a lot of trouble. So, and I think a lot of people are terrified about what happens after death. So another reason for us to run from getting old, we cover up and pretend like it's not going to happen.
Sure. Well, those are all really good points. And I often find myself wishing that we had a society that had systems set up that valued human life more. And I think that taking care of our elderly is a really huge part of that, and valuing life, because life is not over until it's over, and there are still lots of things to consider. So what are your thoughts on how our society handles death and dying?
It's just as bad as aging. Like I said earlier, so many people are afraid. They're afraid of the unknown. And from what I've seen, a lot of people don't buy into their afterlife vision or their professed faith or, doctrine. They don't buy into their descriptions of heaven and hell. And so the separation from a loved one is terrifying to a lot of people. I know I lost my dad to suicide when I was 12. And so I have often supported others that have gone through the same thing. I also feel that society takes advantage of death. At the time of death, people are sold huge, expensive funerals to honor the deceased loved one, when really that's just for the people that are still here. But when someone's in such deep grief, they're going to spend every penny that they can to do whatever it seems to make the death a good thing, make it a positive thing, I think.
Sure.
But the funeral costs can be astronomical and just unreasonable. So a really important thing for everyone to do is to have an advance directive and have someone that you trust, that you know is going to follow through with your wishes, to be what's called your power of attorney for health care, or your health care agent. It depends on what state you're in. And talking about what you want at the end of life is super important as well. And having that dialogue before you become ill or before you're at death's door helps your family to have some sense of comfort and a roadmap to follow when they're in that deep grief.
Sure, and less likely to get taken advantage of, I suppose, if they have that roadmap.
Yes.
Those are all really good takeaways. They'll definitely be in the show notes. For those who don't know, what is hospice care and why is it beneficial?
Okay. Hospice care is care that is provided for someone who has a limited life expectancy. The regulations say 6 months or less. That is an educated guess by a physician and a team of healthcare professionals. So if someone lives longer than 6 months, they're not going to get kicked off of hospice. If, they have a what's called a recertification period. So periodically they are recertified for hospice. If they still meet the guidelines, then they stay on hospice and continue to reap the benefits. So hospice itself is, like I said, care that is provided for someone who has limited prognosis. There are 4 levels of care for hospice. The first is called routine home care, and that is provided in the patient's home. That can be anywhere. If they live in a nursing home, an assisted living, under the bridge, in a homeless shelter, hospice will go to that patient.
Okay.
There's a team of professionals. It is led by a physician, but the physician, he usually doesn't see the patient. He relies on his team. The team is headed up by an RN an RN and an LPN usually. They will see the patient at least once a week. Then they have a home health aide to help with activities of daily living, bathing, changing the bed, meals, whatever that is. There's also a chaplain. If they want one, the chaplain can go and address the spiritual needs of someone that is facing death. There's a social worker. The social worker is a great resource for any resources that the family may be available for. Maybe somebody doesn't know that they're eligible for food stamps, and the social worker can help them to get that process going. They also have volunteers. So let's say you have a veteran that's on hospice. Maybe there's a veteran that has volunteered, and they can swap war stories or whatever and just add to the quality of life for that person that's dying. There's also an RN that's on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So if you call at 3 o'clock in the morning and your loved one is throwing up and in pain and you don't know what to do, you can get a hold of a nurse within minutes. And if need be, she'll come and make a visit at your house.
Wow.
Yeah. There's also bereavement care. So after the patient has passed on, the hospice should follow that family for 13 months. So that first year, all those anniversaries, birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, whatever, you've got a team that's following you. And if somebody's really having a hard time, you can let them know and they can be another resource for you. So that's basic hospice care, and that's called routine home care. Now, there's 3 other levels of care. Continuous care, again, is provided in the home, and it's if there are symptoms that are out of control. Again, I'll use pain because that is something that people are very afraid of, is dying in pain. So we may need to put a nurse in the home for a period of between 8 to 24 hours. And the nurse may administer medications. She may titrate the medications up or down. She's in constant contact with the doctor and giving the family support. So that's the continuous care. General inpatient is another level of that continuous care that is given at a freestanding facility or a contract facility. Some hospices don't have their own building, so they contract with a hospital to provide that same level of really intensive care with pain and symptom control. And then finally, there's respite care. Caregiving for someone who is on hospice is exhausting for the family. And so I'm not sure of the regs now, but it used to be like every 5 weeks, they could have what's called respite care, where their loved one would go to a facility. The hospice pays to get them there and bring them home, and they stay there for 5 days, and then they go home. So we've had families that have gone on vacation for 5 days or just stayed at home and vegged for 5 days without having to care for this person. Mm-hmm. So those are the 4 levels of care for hospice.
That makes me wonder, has anyone ever passed away on respite care and their family wasn't there for it? Or would they not be able to go on respite care if they were super close? Or how does that work?
Usually with respite care, it's for folks that are doing okay, but not necessarily. I mean, because you need a break, especially when things get really, really rough. And a lot of times what would happen in the inpatient unit where I worked is someone would come in on respite care, and then they may have to transition to the general inpatient because their symptoms got out of control, or they started what we call actively dying.
Okay. What does actively dying mean?
Actively dying is where they are within days to hours of death. There's a different breathing pattern. They may see people that have passed on. They may see angels. They may, some people see animals. They'll talk to those people. They may reach out to them. Their body starts to change. They will start having different breathing patterns. Like they'll take really deep breaths, and it seems like they're holding their breath, and then they'll let it out, and then it'll be minutes before they take the next one. Or they'll breathe really rapidly. They may run a really high fever, as high as 104 or 105.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then their skin may change color. So there are signs that we know that someone is actively dying. And not everybody does that, but if someone does start that process, we have time to say, okay, you need to call your son in Fort Lauderdale and get him up here because it's going to be the next 24, 48 hours.
And you actually let the patient know that that's coming?
No, the patient is usually at that point not responsive.
Okay.
Yeah, most of the time they're not responsive. So we're just there mostly for the family at this point and to make the patient comfortable.
Okay. And then I have one more follow-up question that your explanation sparked. So the difference between routine home care and then inpatient, where they're in a facility, it seems like a lot of people would not want to pass away in a facility. So what are the criteria for having to go? And you had said something about like if symptoms get really out of control. Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Intractable nausea, like nausea you cannot stop. They're throwing up. And we've tried continuous care at the home, and that's nothing we do at home is working. So we may need to start an IV with some kind of an IV medication. So they'll take them to the inpatient unit where we can actually start that IV and give that medication intravenously. Same thing with pain. A lot of times pain gets so out of control that the oral medications at home don't control it. So a patient would come into the inpatient unit to have that medication titrated or changed, the route changed, or we may have to change medications or add another one. So it's kind of like being in an inpatient unit, but the goal is comfort and not cure.
Gotcha. Okay. And then on a more philosophical level, why is hospice care so important?
So many reasons. Part of it, honestly, is because our society is so death-defying and so afraid of death. If hospice is used as it should be, which means for the last 6 months of life, that gives the hospice time to prepare both the patient and the family for the upcoming death. It provides all types of support. It decreases healthcare costs and increases life expectancy. There is a study that says folks on hospice live about 30 days longer than if they weren't on hospice.
Oh, wow.
And I think that's because of all the different attention they're getting and their symptoms are being controlled, so they can actually concentrate on the job of living and just having quality of life. So I spoke of cost being decreased. On hospice, a patient no longer goes back and forth to the hospital. Let's say your grandmother's 98 years old and she keeps getting bladder infections and she has kidney stones and she has gallstones and she's been back and forth to the hospital, and she is tired and she doesn't want to go anymore. So you decide, okay, Granny, we're going to put you on hospice. So now Granny doesn't have to go to the hospital anymore. If she starts getting sick in the middle of the night, you call the hospice nurse. So the cost of an ER visit or a hospital stay is eliminated. It also, when you send someone to the hospital, it just messes up their schedule, especially an elderly person with dementia. That's the worst thing you can do is to take them out of their environment. So again, that's another benefit. It also eliminates expensive treatments. I've mentioned before that, in my opinion, giving blood to a 98-year-old woman with a terminal illness it's inhumane and it's a waste of resources that could be used for someone else. Mm-hmm. But those treatments are not usually done in hospice. So again, you're eliminating expensive treatments. Hospice pays for supplies, medications, all that stuff that comes in. They'll also pay for medical equipment, hospital beds, oxygen, shower chair, bedside commode, overbed table, wheelchair. And it's 100% paid for by Medicare and Medicaid, and most insurances pay for hospice, or they have a hospice benefit.
Wow, okay.
They're also required to take non-funded patients. A certain portion of their census must be non-funded. More benefits of having hospice: it's comfort and pain control. The patient's able to stay in their home, and as you said earlier, most people don't want to die in a facility. They want to be in their own home, in their bed, surrounded by their family and their things, and hospice allows that to happen. We also, like I said, support the family, prepare them, and we can also help with final arrangements, and we can help with things like advance directives, living wills, all those types of things that are so overwhelming when someone does receive a terminal diagnosis. And finally, it almost guarantees dignity and quality of life versus quantity.
Gotcha. So you had mentioned a couple of times that hospice is intended to be used for the last 6 months, not just maybe the last week or last day or something like that. How would a family know when it's time to call hospice?
I'm glad you asked me that question. That is the doctor's job.
Oh.
And unfortunately, our physicians either buy into, they're so afraid of death and dying. Again, they're not, a lot of docs have never thought about their own mortality, and facing death and dying is not something that they really talk about in medical school. That is improving. I know a lot of physicians would come to the hospice house for a rotation, but it was just to come and see what we did. It wasn't actually to spend time. And again, my opinion, I think they should spend a couple of weeks with hospice. So physicians don't refer in a timely manner, but it is the physician's job. And I believe Medicare now requires them to have an end-of-life discussion with their patients.
Okay.
So hopefully we'll see that change and people utilize hospice sooner.
Gotcha. Can you describe for us what types of patients come in to hospice? Are they different ages?
Many different diagnoses qualify a patient for hospice. I have taken care of a newborn, and the oldest patient I've taken care of was 107. But that newborn taught me so much, and her family taught me so much. And the 107-year-old would jump up out of her chair and say, "I'm Johnny Jump Up." And so I had both ends of the scale. All diagnoses, people think of hospice being only for cancer patients, and that's absolutely not true. Heart disease, dementias, diabetic complications, stroke, trisomies, which is what the baby had, Down syndrome, all different stages of the disease. And sometimes there may be complications from, say, birth defects. I had a Down patient that had heart disease, and that's ultimately what took him. But let's see what else. Kidney failure, liver disease, AIDS, HIV, COPD is a big one. So many smokers and so many folks that, people didn't know how bad cigarettes were for them, and now they're just all over the place. And that is one of the hardest deaths to watch for me is someone that can't breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to relieve that suffering is super important. So,
for sure. I'm going to skip around a little bit from what we had planned because death and dying is a very emotional thing, obviously, and you describing the types of patients that come in there got to me a little bit. But do you ever become attached to the patients, and if so, how do you cope with their loss?
I do become attached. I don't think I would be a good nurse if I was completely detached.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned early on in hospice that if I was going to be effective, I had to put up a boundary. So I try to put that up when I meet my patient because I know it's going to be for a short term and that I'm there to make their life better. So that, keeping that in the back of my mind helps. But it is difficult, as with the baby. And there were all kind of other things that came into play with some of the nurses and other staff members. So it's super emotional. But I grieve. I grieve with the families. I'll cry. I stay in touch with some of them. I have some families that, even though we're not supposed to do that, but you kind of bump into each other on Facebook or in town, and I do stay in touch with some of them. But the biggest thing is to allow myself to grieve and to know that I did a good job and I did the best thing I could for them, and I made their death a good one and a comfortable one.
Gotcha. So how do you help the families cope with the loss of a loved one?
After the death, that's more a function of the bereavement department or coordinator. But at the immediate time of death, there's a process that I go through immediately after death. There's a lot of tears, a lot of pain and anguish, and I just allow them to feel that, and we talk about it, and I'll hug and comfort and get tissues and just stand there and just be a presence. I pray with patients or families, just listening to them, being there for them. And that's really, all I can do at that moment, and just know that my presence is comforting for them.
Sure. Before the death, do you help them deal with the fact that it's coming?
Yes. I had one little lady that was British. She had breast cancer and had an arm removed. And so she said that she only had one wing.
Oh.
And one day she looked at me and she said, "Am I going to die soon?" And I told her, "Yes, you are." And she said, "Will you promise to keep me comfortable?" And I said, "Yes, I will." And I did, and I was able to be there when she started through the process and was able to administer medications for her to make her comfortable. And I was actually there when she passed away and was able to support her husband.
Gotcha. So what has working with the patients and the families taught you about life?
I think mostly that we're all alike. We're more alike than we're different. And I think that's something that we forget so often. It's also taught me to be nice to your family if you can. Sometimes family is not the kind of people you want to be nice to, or you're not able to be nice to your family, but if you can be nice to your family, it's important. Also, enjoy silly things, special moments. My daughter, well, every Christmas we get Christmas pajamas, and this last Christmas I got a unicorn onesie. And if I'm really depressed, I put on my unicorn onesie and run around the house, and it makes me feel better. So being silly, it just, you don't get a second chance to do this stuff. Get off your cell phone and talk to people. We don't talk to people. We don't communicate anymore. So talking to people, super, super important. Play games, get a hobby, do the things you might do someday.
Gotcha.
If possible, because someday, maybe sooner than you think. Like, you keep saying you want to go to Alaska, go. As soon as you can afford it, go. Don't wait. Use your good china. Don't keep it in the cabinet. And be prepared for it, and talk about getting old and feeble and eventually dying. Talk to your family and loved ones about it. Have an advance directive and a power of attorney for health care, no matter how old you are. And you can always change it. Also, move. Keep your body moving and keep your mind moving.
All very good tips. Sort of logistically, what does a day in the life of a hospice nurse look like, and what are the common things that you have to do? And I know you've mentioned some of it, but if you could sort of take us through the common tasks to paint a picture, that would be great.
Well, in the hospice unit, it's a lot like I said, it's almost like being in a hospital or an ICU. We have med passes and then continent care and feeding and rounds and repositioning and procedures and starting IVs. And then you've got all the other stuff that goes along with it. So that's a pretty cut and dried set of functions. There's tons of psychosocial support for the families and sometimes the patient if they're alert and oriented. And lots of paperwork. The paperwork, of course, because it is government funded, is astronomical like any other healthcare. Home hospice is different. It's extremely hard. there is a lot of driving. When I was doing on-call, I could get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning and have to drive 150 miles.
Oh, wow.
Go see my patient, yes, and then come back, and then I could get another call in the middle of the night. So it was super taxing, very, very tiring. But a routine day would be I go into the home, take a health history, see how they've been doing that week, take their vital signs. If I need to set up their medications, sometimes I would do that. Order any kind of medications that need to be refilled. If they're having symptoms, we address those, especially pain, urinary retention. A lot of times they can't pee, and that causes a lot of issue. They may have wounds and anorexia. So all these symptoms we have to address, whenever we're in the home. So usually you spend about an hour per patient, and then you can spend another hour driving to your next patient. And then you have documentation. And I got into a horrible habit of not documenting at the bedside and bring it home with me. And my kitchen table used to be piled with papers. And then when we had computers, finally, the computer was always on the table open. You also could have admissions, which take about 4 hours. A death could take who knows how long, and then a condition change. So you've got your routine folks that you're planning on seeing, but you got all these curveballs that may be thrown at you too. So being a hospice nurse, you have to be really flexible. You have to be able to kind of change on a dime and not freak out and not be real regimented, because you just can't.
Gotcha. So was death and dying scary to you before you started your career?
Not really, not so much, because I had been through my father dying when I was young, and then my mother died after when my youngest son was a year old. So I had been around death a lot. What scared me, and this is going to sound silly, but dead animals used to petrify me. I could never touch one of my pets that had died.
Oh.
And so I freaked out, thinking the first death that I had to attend, I was so worried because I knew the patient was going to pass that day. So I was really freaked out, like, oh my God, can I do this? But now after I saw her, it was like she was so peaceful, and I knew she'd been suffering, and it was like, oh, she's released. And so no, it's not. It's really beautiful. It's very holy, very spiritual, and all kind of weird things happen, especially like in the inpatient unit. At the time of death, we had one lady that passed, and all the lights went off for a second and then came back on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've got tons of those stories. So, so for me, that says a lot of things, that we just don't disappear. We don't just go away and go into nothing. We go to a better place, and we go to rest, and I feel it's peaceful and beautiful and loving and released from the body that's broken. So death and dying to me is it's a really sacred thing. Now, when I get to my own death, I don't know.
Sure. And I was actually thinking about asking you what it's like experiencing someone actually dying in that minute. Are there any other stories that you could add, or any more details you could tell us about?
So many. Well, I think, I know that we choose the minute that we leave, unless we're in some kind of traumatic injury or accident or something and can't really have any control. But we were giving a man a bath, and his daughter had been sitting at the bedside just 24/7. She never left his side, and we asked her to leave so we could bathe him because we knew he was close. And we rolled him over, and a lot of times when you do that, they will pass. And he did. And my partner that was helping me, she said, I think he's gone. And I rolled him back over. And I called his nickname, and I said, you better not be gone. I said, she's out there waiting for you. And, of course, he was. But so he had just passed in that moment. One of the second patients that I witnessed the death was actually on my birthday, and I had taken care of her for several months. She had dementia. She didn't smile. And they called me and said that she was about to go, did I want to be there? I was off, and I went. And I was holding her hand, and all of a sudden a smile came from one side of her mouth to the other, and she had this big, beautiful smile, and she took a deep breath, and then she was gone.
So it's not like a dramatic thing then?
Mm-mm. No, it's just one moment, and you can almost see when the soul or spirit or essence, whatever you call it, leaves the body. Some people, their mouth will kind of just twitch a little bit, like they're being separated from something.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always peaceful. It's always holy and spiritual and beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think we've covered most of my questions and really the stuff that I was curious about, and hopefully that our listeners were curious about. But is there anything that I didn't ask you that you think is important for us to know?
I think just, again, it's so important to plan for the future for yourself and for your family so that you know that what you want to happen will happen. So advance directives, super, super important. If you don't want CPR done and life-sustaining measures, let somebody know and write it down. You can always change your mind. Each state has different advance directives, so I think you can probably Google your states, whoever the government, and they should be able to provide you with an advance directive. You should be able to download it off the internet. Or hospices will provide you with an advance directive. So those are some just super important things I just wanted to reiterate, but I think you pretty much covered everything.
Okay. Can you tell us real quick, what happens if you don't have an advance directive?
Then whoever is your next of kin makes your decisions for you. And it is different in different states. I have a friend who passed in North Carolina, and his children were all of age. So his children had to make decisions about his funeral. His parents couldn't make any decisions at all. And so they had to stand by, and if they didn't agree with what the children had decided, it was too bad. So super important to make that known, because your next of kin may be somebody that doesn't care if you suffer.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, Fran, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure having you on the show today.
Thanks. I really enjoyed it.
You guys, what'd you think of that? That's some good stuff that Fran told us about, and I always love talking to her. So for all the cool stuff that Fran mentions in this episode, go to onbeinghumanpodcast.com/episodes/022. Be sure to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts so others like yourselves can find the show. And I want to get to know you so bad. So let's have a chat over at facebook.com/onbeinghumanpodcast. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Tune in weekly at onbeinghumanpodcast.com for more soul-exposing explorations of what it means to be human. Until next week, love to you all.